President Jimmy Carter will be remembered as a Christian evangelical who believed Jesus would approve of gay marriage and even more. The oldest living ex-U.S. President, Jimmy Carter, was seen showing support to the LGBTQ plus community and same-sex marriage during an interview that he gave to HuffPost Live a couple of years ago. Former U.S. President Carter said he believed Jesus would approve of gay marriage. That is an exact quote. However, churches that disagree with same-sex marriage should not have to perform them. In the interview, Carter also said, quote, "I have a hard time believing that Jesus would approve abortions unless it was because of rape or incest or if the mother's life was in danger. So I've had that struggle," end quote. The interviewer asked Carter about his political career since he is a man of faith and comes from a church tradition. Carter said there was never any serious conflict between his faith and political responsibilities. The interviewer then quickly asked about gay marriages, to which Carter said, quote, "There's no problem with me, you know. I think everybody should have the right to get married regardless of their sex," end quote. The only time where he said he would draw a line is he does not favor the government forcing a local church congregation to perform gay marriages if they didn't want to. He suggested that two partners who want to get married could go or should be able to go to a local courthouse or a different church and get married.
I never knew of any word or action of Jesus Christ that discriminated against anyone because of whom they were. And the sexual orientation of a person is just like the color of their skin, or whether they're poor or evil, or poor or rich, or whether they live in a foreign country or our country. So I think discrimination against anyone and depriving them of actual equal rights in the United States is a violation of the basic principles of the Constitution that all of us revere in this country. So no discrimination against anyone is the best. Treat everyone equal in the eyes of God, and everybody equal in the eyes of our Constitution, and also equal in the eyes of the laws that our congressmen pass. So we ought to have that attitude to other people. In the eyes of God, they're just as good as we are. Thank you.
Jimmy Carter is with us. He's been moved to hospice. We wanted to do this story in anticipation of what he's done, because we know a gigantic percentage of LGBTQ community has no understanding of President Carter. President from 1976, came in after the Watergate scandal to 1980, was defeated in second run against Ronald Reagan. Jimmy Carter for LGBT doesn't get the recognition that he should for our community, but in the 1960s was the first voice in Plains, Georgia, at his church, to say when ushers would not seat black people in his church in Plains, Georgia, to say as a leader in his church that was unacceptable and the usher should seat black people, and integrated his church in Plains in the 1960s. He became governor of Georgia and was speaking up in affirmation for LGBT, the black community, women's rights, long ahead of anyone else in comparable seat as a governor of a southern state. I remind you, in terms of what he thought about gay marriage, he was ahead of Barack Obama. He was ahead of Bill Clinton in timelines in support of LGBT. So while he moves to hospice, we take a moment to recognize what he did for LGBT and how he spoke up through his whole life. I had a great experience. I've been trying to identify the date. I think it was around 1989. Americus, Georgia, in central Georgia, is the home. It was the original home of Habitat for Humanity. The reason Jimmy Carter was so fundamentally involved in Habitat for Humanity, of which they've built millions of homes worldwide, was because of the proximity of Americas and Plains. And he became president of the United States. And then after leaving his presidency, he pushed Habitat for so much because they were neighbors in Plains and Americus, Georgia. And I went to Americus in, I think it was 89, because there was a hotel there that was very famous, and I wanted to stay at it, and I went with a friend, and we went to Plains. And we were there for the weekend, and I read, oh, you can go to Jimmy Carter's church that he goes to, and this was 15 years, or no, 9 or 10 years after he was president. And I went to the church, and he did a Bible study, and all you had to do was walk into the church, and President Jimmy Carter was doing a Bible study. It's one of the great memories of my entire life. And I didn't understand his importance of voicing support for LGBT at the time, but I do now. And we take a moment to recognize that in advance of what the inevitable is. He's had a full life. He's 98 years old. And also, I think what's really super interesting about Jimmy Carter is arguably over the last 43 years, he's 98 years old, he accomplished more in his life after being president of the United States in terms of impact of people of color, on women, on LGBT, on peace, on voting initiatives and democracy across the world than when he was president of the United States. Compare and contrast that in a negative way to Donald Trump, Jimmy Carter.
I'd also like to point out, and I'm not sure why he's in hospice at this point, but we do know a couple of years ago he was diagnosed with brain cancer. And it doesn't speak to LGBTQ specifically, but it does speak to him as a person and humanity. After the diagnosis, he did not retire out of the public spotlight. He was still at Habitat for Humanity sites, building houses. He was still holding his Bible studies at his church. He did not give up on himself. And by not doing that, he has continued to be there for his community and our community. So I hope he and his family are comfortable and at peace in these days.
LGBTQ plus news is vital for our community and for the broader world as a whole. We have enough enemies at Fox News. Tucker, Sean, and Laura are loud. We need passionate allies. Happening Out Television Network, Queer News Tonight, and It's Happening Out are literally out of the closet and into the headlines. Our community needs your support. Like this broadcast and subscribe now to ensure the growth of the entire LGBTQ plus community.